Hi there, this is the second video associated with the step adding ACL within the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component. And in this step we're going to look at the second bit of access control. We're going to be looking at the code within the tutorial. Now if we think about what we need to do to add in access control in our Hello World application? Well, first of all, we need to create an asset ID field in our Hello World database record. That's going to be our link to the assets table. We'll need to define what actions we want and at what asset level. So there'll be certain actions at the kind of hello world level, certain actions at the category level, and certain actions at the lower individual message level. We need to define the fields in our XML files, and we need to find the associated layouts to allow an administrator to set the permissions for the various user groups on our Hello World assets. Once they've been set, we need to be able to store those permissions then in the assets table. And when they've all been set up, we need to use those permissions. Now we're going to need to change the views to reflect what a user can do. So if a user can't do create, for example, there's no point in putting in a new button onto the form. And in our application, really, we're only looking at the backend functions here. The ACL applies equally to the front end, but really we've only got the back end here to test it against. And as well as changing the views, we need to also validate what the user has done, because obviously with a new button not appearing on a form, that really doesn't stop a user sending in an HTTP request, which kind of reflects a new. So we still need to validate those actions in the back end, as it were, handling the post HTTP posts. So let's look at these steps in turn and look at the tutorial code. Well, the first one's fairly straightforward. We just need to add that field into the database. And it's going to be somewhere. Here we are here. So the position doesn't really matter, but the fact that it's called asset ID does really matter. So whenever we're adding this field in, it has to be called asset ID. Some of the core functionality relies on that being the name of it. So that's that. Define the actions that we want. So as you can probably guess, those are going to be in our XML file, access.xml. So we're going to have, for Hello World, we're going to have these actions at the component level, and these actions at the category level, and these actions at the individual message level. So at an individual message level, we can set up whether a user group can delete a message or can edit a message. As well as that, we need to be able to define the layout file and the fields. So there are three areas here. The first is the component area, and that's really for our Hello World global configuration. That's this. And this is really run under config, as you can see up there. So config looks after this. And all you have to tell config to do is to include this field here. So whenever we look at this, all of this here is associated with just this field here. So it's more than just a simple input text file. Notice that it's type rules. And if we go along to our standard form field types here, and we scroll down, we see rules provides a matrix of group by action options for managing access control, which basically says that it outputs this. And config will read this bit here in the same way as it reads these other bits here for our other settings associated with Hello World, and it will use its own layout file to display that. And notice as well, it's got component equals com hello world and section equals component, and that's referring back up to this file here where the component is hello world and the section is component. So the bit that it is going to, this rules field is going to be handling is this bit here. Now if we go down to message, then we need to also add that field into our message, and that's done somewhere down the bottom. Here we are here. So notice again we've got this field of type rules, but notice this time we've got com hello world and the section is message. So it will actually pick up the actions that are associated with the message section of that access.xml file. And in our case, we need to provide a layout file which is associated with that. The old layout file that we were using previously would just as well have worked, but I've changed it here so that it actually displays it in tabs in common with some of the other applications. We also do need this asset ID that is used by the core functionality. So the third area then is the categories here. And thankfully categories really looks after itself, so we really don't need to define a field here for the categories. It will do its equivalent and will expect to look in the access component equals hello world and the section name being category, and it will pick up these then and allow the administrator to set permissions against these actions. Right. So we've done that, we've done the fields and layouts. I'll leave the store permissions in the assets table just for a moment, and we'll go on to change views to reflect what the user can do. Now, whenever we are talking about views, we're talking about this view here. So this view here has got buttons like new, edit and delete. And if the user that is logged on doesn't have create access, then there's no point in putting new there. Similarly, if he doesn't have delete access, there's no point in putting delete. So this is one of the views we're going to have to change. And then if we click on this, we see another set of buttons here. So for example, if he doesn't have create access, there's no point in putting a save and new there, which is going to kind of create a new record. Oh, sorry, save as copy was the one I was thinking of. So which are those views? Well, the first view here is our Hello Worlds view. And if we go to our tutorial code, this is us here, Hello Worlds, view.html.php. So this is the view that we want to change, and we want to reflect these buttons, have these buttons reflect the permissions that the user who's logged on does have. So we go down here, and this is where we have our JHelper content get actions method call, which we looked at in the previous video. And what this will do is this will return us a nice object which will give us the ability to determine if the user has got these permissions. So for example, we can do get core create, and this will return true or false depending on whether our user has got that permission. So if it's true do we put out that add new, and similarly for the other buttons there. Just notice this. I just noticed this in the tutorial. Previously, this was J error raise, and this has been changed to throw new exception. And there is a change which has been in Joomla for some time, is to get away from this J error raise, and because this J error is deprecated. So I'll include this video, or sorry, this link to this page in the notes. And if you go on to this discussion here that I'm pointing to, you'll see a lot of background to moving away from J error and why they want to do that and that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's the first file. The other file then is our Hello World view, and that's what we get whenever we click on one of these, and we get these buttons here. We want to selectively either put these out or not put them out, depending on the permissions of the user has. Notice again, we've got our JHelper content call, but this time we're actually looking for a particular asset. It's going to be one of the assets associated with our message that we're going to want to get there. And similarly, we're going to put out buttons based on whether the user has got access to the various actions or not. Just one little point is that apply. If you think about setting some settings within Windows, for example, you get a modal window up with various settings, and then you often have a button which is labeled apply, which applies those settings but leaves that window open. And the other button you have is OK, which applies the settings and actually closes that window. So whenever we talk about apply here, it is that sort of apply button where you apply the changes but you leave the window open, whereas save is more like the OK button. However, when they appear on the screen, the apply button is called save and the OK button is save and close. So just to be aware of that. So I think that is about it for changing the views. But as I say, we have to still validate what the user has done against the permissions. So there's a number of permissions that we will really like to check. One is, if we go back to these permissions, right. One is, for example, core.manage, and manage is really talking about, can he manage the Hello World application? And if he hasn't got that core.manage, we really want to bar him from anything to do with administration of the Hello World application here, or Hello World component. So the easiest way to do that is to, if we go here, is to look at the first file that admin accesses, which is our hello world.php. And if we go down to that, this is our admin hello world.php. So this is the first file that is run on the administration side within the Hello World component. And we check, does this user have access to core manage? And if he doesn't, then we basically reject it. So that's the first thing to do. Where are we? Second thing to do then, oops, we need to consider, can the user create? And then we'll look at create and edit and delete. So if we look at, first of all, the create is going to come in and it's going to run our hello world controller here. And this extends JController form. So if we have a look at JController form, which is going to be in our libraries legacy. Sorry, controller form, here we go. Okay, JController form. And whenever we get a, I think it's going to be save, isn't it? Yeah, save. So whenever anyone does anything like this, I could actually show this on the, if we put up F12, into the message details just there. The params. It's going to come in com hello world and layout edit, and somewhere it's going to be a task. Task is hello world save. So this is what it's going to run. It's going to run our save function within our controller, which is going to be supplied by our JController, whatever it was, form. So this is the function which is going to be run whenever they do a save. And if we go down here, we find a place where there's an access check. So it's really saying, is this person allowed to save? If we follow that down, here's our function save. And allow save really says, look at the record ID. If there is a record ID there, it must mean there's a record already in the database. So we're really looking at allow edit. If there's no record ID, then we're doing allow add. So if we look for allow add, for example, there's our allow add, and it's really checking, is the user authorized to create at the option level, at this com hello world level, a record. So it's really going back to our access.xml here, and it's really looking, does he have this permission here? And if we look at our code, then in our allow add. Okay, so this is in our controller that is extending JController form, and allow add, well, really the stuff in JController form is just exactly what we want. So all we're doing here is returning the parent. However, if we look at the equivalent for editing, so again, what it's doing is getting the user and authorizing it against core edit in our option in our hello world. So it's basically going back and saying, does this user have this permission here? However, that's not really what we want. We want to check, does he have this permission here against our particular message? So that's why we need to have a change in our file here. So what we're doing is we're overriding the allow edit, which is in our kind of legacy J controller form class, and we're saying get user authorize and authorize look for core edit, but at this asset level rather than the top hello world level, hello world level. We're looking for it at this lower level. So we've done create and we've done editing. And the third one we need to do is delete. And if we go back here, try to delete something. We'll see that this is calling hello worlds delete. So it's going to come in and it's going to look at our hello worlds controller, which is this. Our hello worlds controller is then going to get this model, and the model is hello world, right, rather than hello worlds. So this is what it's going to pick up in our model. And this extends JModel admin. So if we have a look then at JModel admin, go to our model, JModel admin, and it's going to run the delete function, which is this. And if we go down here, we see this line here, can delete. And again, what can delete here is doing, it's checking, can this user delete this at the option level, at the com hello world level. But again, we wanted, if we go back to our access.im, by default it's checking this, but really what we want to do is check this. So that's why we want to override it in our file here, which is going to be hello world.php, our model file. And rather than checking it at that higher level, com hello world, we want to check it at the lower level, at the record level. So those are the ways that we can actually check that the user can't do the sorts of things he's not allowed to do. So that's that. Let's go back then to store permissions in the assets table, which is on down here a bit. Now, as it says here, Joomla very kindly helps us by JTable really handling the storing of the assets in the assets table for our records. So all we have to do is, well, help it along. So the first thing we should have a wee look at is when we send a record here, let's go in this one here. In fact, I'm going to go on to Chrome here. And I'll put on our developer tools. And I'll change some permission here. Set that to denied, for example. And then just clear that. Sort of log. And save that. Here is our post request that has gone up as a result of saving those permissions. And if we have a look down here, we see what has been sent in the post parameters. So in the same way as when we looked at params, we had params kind of being an array of an array here. In the same way, we've got for rules, we've got JForm of rules, and we've got the various actions, and we've got the various user groups here. And the one I probably set there was 5, set it to 0. So in a similar way in our code, when we look at this is our data coming in from our post. When we had params, we looked at array of params. And in the same way as that, we're going to have to look at the array of rules. And this is going to be really that set of rules. That's going to be these things here, which reflect the permissions that we've been set. And what we do is we pass that into the constructor of JAccess rules that we looked at last time, which is kind of like the internal representation of these rules. And then we just tell our JTable that this is, we've got rules really associated with this record. And then from that, JTable will sort out writing the necessary details to the assets record. In fact, we can kind of think of the assets record, the fields in the assets record, and kind of like an extension to our own Hello World record. You know, from a database point of view, they really fit within our own record. But because those assets are kind of shared and share functionality with lots of components, they're actually separated out into a separate table. So when we add things into our assets table, JTable needs a bit of help. So it needs us to tell it 3 fields. One is which is the parent ID, what is the name, and what is the title. And the way we do that is by overriding 3 functions. So get asset name, and we're returning hello world, and the ID. So that is what is going to go in here. So down the bottom, we've got these things here. Our get asset title, we're just going to put the greeting. So that's the message associated with that record. And then in the parent, well, we're going to see if the record has got a category, because if it's got a category, we're going to take that category as the parent. But if it hasn't got a category, then we're going to say the parent is the hello world component itself. So you can have a mess around. This one here at the bottom, hello world, has got a category 120, and it's going up to 119, which has got a category there. I think most of these have got a category. Okay. The other thing about storing the records is that if you look at storing these records, let me just check what this is. I'm going to change something of this level, which doesn't really matter. You'll see that what we've actually got here is an AJAX call. So when I've changed this, it is instigated an XHR, which is an AJAX call, up to, and you can see here it's going to config, and it's sending this task. And that is really enables it to work out this calculated setting, and that's what's returned in response to the AJAX call. But if you look at the post parameters that it expects, and there's a bit of functionality which actually sets up that AJAX call, which is in media. No, it's not there, sorry. It's in the top level media. That's down here. permissions. Okay, function to send permissions via Ajax to com-config, and what it really expects is that this here, the hello world, is the name of the view that we're talking about here, which really places restriction on what we can call this in our assets table. And it also expects the title to be sent as well. And for that reason, there's a bit of code down at the bottom here, which has a kind of dummy title field here, which gets set to the same value as we have in the greeting. So there's just a bit of a workaround there, because the permissions, the JavaScript there really fits content. We have to do a bit of work really to fit it into the kind of pattern that it's got there. So that is really the sum total of what we've done. Now, if we think about testing it, we have got, I've got logged on as a manager here. And if I check the permissions, I've actually set on our global configuration, I've set all of our user groups to basically inherited. So a lot of these things are not allowed by default. They're probably going to be allowed in your default Joomla application, but I've set them to inherited, which means they're going to be not allowed, so that I can really control them at the hello world level. And what I've got at the hello world level, I've set a manager. He can access the administration interface, yes, but he can't do any create, delete, or edit. So I'm logged on here as that manager here, and this is the hello world view. So as you can see, there are no buttons here. I really can't do anything. If I change log out there and log in again as administrator, the administrator, what was set it up to do is he can access the interface. He's not allowed to create or delete, but he can edit. So when we look at our hello world, you'll see just an edit there. So we can come in here and edit files or edit messages, and that's going to be okay. But he doesn't have any save as new or save as copy, because he isn't allowed to create. Close that. And then the other one that I've set up is a special admin who is basically allowed to create, delete, and edit. And that's on Chrome here. So close that and close that. We should see special administrator. So he has got the ability to create new ones, edit ones, and delete ones. So that's kind of at the component level, but I've also set up some permissions at the individual message level. So if I close this and go to goodbye world, I've set up goodbye world so that the administrator is denied access. So he's not allowed to access that for edit. And so when I come along here to the administrator, he has edit access in general, but it was, let me just check which one it was, goodbye world. Click on goodbye world to edit it. It should fail, edit not permitted. And for that reason, because it's a parent of the special admin, the special admin won't be allowed to do that either. So if I go along here, and let's just click on my world and edit. Edit not permitted. So there it's checking the permissions at the individual message level. And the other one I've done is hello world. So I've set up hello world so that it can't be deleted. So administrator isn't allowed to delete by default, but I've set it also that the special administrator cannot delete that one, whereas he is allowed to generally delete once. Okay, so this is the special administrator. So if I click on this and try and delete it, delete not permitted. Whereas with the other ones, he's going to be allowed to delete. Okay. So that's that. Finally, if you look at these permissions here in our access.xml file, you'll notice that really these are just strings, right? So you can really set in that field really whatever you like. Now admittedly some of these strings have meanings because the core Joomla functionality actually interprets them, things like core dot such, but you can actually define your own, and what you might like to try is defining your own. And what I suggest, and what I'm suggesting you might like to try and do here, is create a new field called special. And you could make that part of your params and make it yes equals 1 or no equals 0. Define a field in the XML file to capture that field special via radio button, and then define a new action, for example, hello world create.special, which will go into that access.xml file, defining if a user group can create a hello world message with special equals yes. And then what you'd need to do is change the admin hello world controller allow add, which is our function. Down here somewhere. Allow add. Change that so that you would disallow that action if special equals yes and the user doesn't have that permission. So I tried that myself and try installing that version, and hopefully this is going to work. I'll close that. Now when I create new, I've got a parameter here, special message, which I can set to yes or no. I can set yes on test message. And this is super user, so a super user will obviously be able to create that. But let's try it with the others. First of all, we'll set up the permissions. So go on here. Hello world. Permissions. And here's our new permission down here. And we'll change the administrator. We'll change the administrator so that he is allowed to create in general, but not allowed to do a create special. And create special for the special admin, we're allowing him to create that. So the administrator shouldn't be able to do a create special, but the special admin should. So our administrator is here. So if we go to components, just let me check this administrator. Yeah. If we go to components, hello world, which is where we were, new, now do a new, set a new message, and we're going to set to yes, and we're going to save and close. Save not permitted. Thankfully that is working. And if we go then to our special administrator and we create a new message, and we'll set up the parameters, yes, and we'll try save and close. Hopefully this should work. Yep, item successfully saved. So you might want to have a play with that and see if you can get that to work. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Bye.